My daughter spent 6 months sleeping in a hospital bed, Ethan Walker said quietly. So if someone else needs the bed tonight, I'm perfectly fine with the floor. Those words were the last thing Victoria Hayes expected to hear when she unlocked the door to Suite 814 at the Grand Summit Hotel in Denver. The storm outside had shut down highways across 3 states. Flights were canceled. Hotels were overflowing. And after a series of booking errors, the CEO of Hayes Technologies had just been informed that the only room remaining in the entire hotel would have to be shared with one of her employees. Victoria had argued. She had called managers. She had demanded alternatives. There were none. The blizzard had buried the city beneath nearly 18 inches of snow, and every available room within 50 miles had been taken. So now she stood in the doorway, designer suitcase in hand, staring at Ethan Walker. He was already settling onto a thin blanket beside the couch. "What are you doing?" she asked. Ethan looked up. "Getting ready for the night. There's a king-size bed." "I know. Then why are you sleeping down there?" Ethan smiled politely. "Because you're my boss." Victoria sighed. "This is ridiculous." "Probably. You don't have to do that." Ethan shrugged. "I'm comfortable." She folded her arms. At work, Ethan was known as dependable but forgettable. He managed operations. He arrived early, stayed late, and rarely spoke during meetings. Most executives barely noticed him. Victoria herself had probably exchanged fewer than 20 conversations with him during the past 3 years. Yet something about him irritated her. Maybe it was the calmness. Maybe it was the way he never seemed impressed by titles. Tonight, that same calm expression remained on his face. The suite was quiet except for the steady hum of the heater and the faint rattle of snow against the windows. Golden lamplight reflected across polished wood furniture. Outside, the city disappeared behind curtains of white. Victoria set her luggage down. "Take the bed," she said. "I insist." Ethan shook his head. "I appreciate it, but no." "Why?" For the first time, his eyes drifted toward the bed. "Not with longing. Not with sacrifice. With memory. My daughter spent a long time in one." Victoria frowned. Ethan carefully folded the blanket before speaking again. "Children's Hospital in Seattle. 6 months." The room seemed quieter somehow. "She's okay now?" Victoria asked. "She is." Relief softened his voice. "Strongest person I know." Victoria looked away. Something shifted inside her, something small but unexpected. At the office, she had seen executives compete for private jets, larger bonuses, corner offices, and recognition. Here was a man voluntarily choosing the floor without a trace of resentment. No performance, no complaint, no attempt to earn favor, just quiet dignity. Ethan reached for his phone. The screen lit up with a photograph. Victoria caught only a glimpse before he turned away. A smiling little girl with bright blonde curls wrapped her arms around his neck. The expression on his face was different than any she had ever seen in the office. Softer, warmer, almost peaceful. "Good night, Ms. Hayes," he said. "Victoria is fine." Ethan nodded. "Good night, Victoria." She walked toward the bedroom, but paused at the doorway. For reasons she couldn't explain, she glanced back one more time. Ethan was already lying on the blanket, staring at the ceiling, completely content with less. And in that moment, Victoria Hayes felt the first crack appear in everything she thought she knew about the man sleeping on the floor. Victoria Hayes slept lightly, and sometime after midnight, she opened her eyes to complete silence. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the distant whistle of winter wind against the glass, and the soft amber glow from the hallway lamp slowly brought her back. The storm still raged outside. Snow tapped gently against the windows 20 stories above downtown Denver. She turned toward the living area. Ethan was gone. The blanket on the floor had been folded neatly. Victoria sat up. The digital clock beside the bed read 12:47 a.m. She heard a faint voice coming from the suite's balcony door. Curious despite herself, she slipped out of bed and walked quietly toward the sound. Ethan stood near the window, speaking softly into his phone. His voice carried the warmth of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Did you brush your teeth?" he asked. A small voice answered through the speaker. "Twice." Ethan laughed gently. "Twice. Grandma said one time was enough, but I wanted extra points." Victoria stopped a few feet away. The smile on Ethan's face was impossible to miss. It transformed him completely. The reserved employee she knew from conference rooms seemed to disappear. In his place stood a father whose entire world existed on the other side of that screen. "Well," Ethan said, "I think that deserves at least 3 extra points." Sophie giggled. The sound was bright and innocent even through the tiny speaker. "Did the snowstorm trap you?" she asked. "It did. Are you scared?" Ethan leaned against the window. "Not even a little." "Good." Sophie paused. "Because Mommy always said storms sound bigger than they really are." Ethan became quiet. Victoria noticed the change instantly. Not pain, not sadness. Something gentler. Something that had learned how to carry loss without letting it win. "Your mom was very smart," he said. "She was." Sophie sounded proud. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Did you remember?" Ethan smiled again. "Of course I remembered." "Promise." "I promise." Sophie laughed. "Okay, show me." Ethan reached into his wallet and carefully pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Victoria could not see the writing, but she noticed how carefully he handled it, as though it were worth more than money. "Still carrying it?" Sophie asked. "Every day." "Read it." Ethan unfolded the note. His voice became softer. "Be kind when nobody is watching. Be brave when nobody is cheering. And remember that love is what people feel, not what people say." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. "Mom wrote that?" Sophie asked. "She did." "Good." The little girl yawned. "Then you are doing a good job." For several seconds Ethan said nothing. He simply looked down at the note. "Thank you, Sophie. I love you, Daddy. I love you more." "Impossible." Ethan laughed quietly. "Get some sleep. Good night." The call ended. The room returned to silence. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness beneath the city lights. Ethan carefully folded the note and placed it back into his wallet. He did not know Victoria was standing there. He did not know she had heard every word. She looked at the man she thought she understood. The dependable operations manager. The quiet employee. The invisible face at the far end of conference tables. Yet the man she had just witnessed was something entirely different. Someone carrying responsibility with grace. Someone choosing kindness long after life had given him reasons not to. And for the second time that night, Victoria realized she knew almost nothing about Ethan Walker. The next morning began with the muted glow of winter sunlight filtering through layers of snow clouds. Denver looked almost frozen beneath a blanket of white. Victoria woke earlier than usual, but when she stepped into the living area, Ethan was already gone. The blanket had been folded with military precision. The small coffee table was spotless. Even the coffee maker had been cleaned. She glanced at the clock. 6:15 in the morning. Who wakes up this early during a snowstorm? By 7 o'clock, Victoria made her way downstairs to the hotel restaurant. The lobby buzzed with stranded travelers checking flight updates and weather reports. She spotted Ethan immediately. He sat alone near a corner window, reviewing notes on a tablet while sipping black coffee. Nothing unusual about that. What caught her attention was everyone else. A young waitress carrying a tray stopped beside his table. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." Ethan smiled warmly. "Morning, Claire. How is your son doing?" The waitress brightened. "Much better. He got accepted into the program." "That is wonderful news. We could not have done it without your help." Ethan shook his head. "You did the hard part." The waitress laughed softly before continuing toward another table. Victoria slowed her pace. "Help? What help?" Before she could think further, an elderly bellman approached Ethan. "There he is." The older man grinned and offered his hand. Ethan stood immediately and shook it. "Good to see you, Frank." "You too, son." Frank lowered his voice. "My granddaughter graduates next month." Ethan's face lit up. "That is fantastic. She wanted me to tell you she still keeps your letter." Ethan looked embarrassed. "She earned everything herself." "Maybe," Frank replied. But somebody reminded her not to quit. Victoria watched from a distance. The interaction lasted less than a minute. Yet the respect in Frank's eyes was impossible to miss. Ethan sat back down. Moments later, another employee stopped to greet him. Then another. A housekeeper. A restaurant manager. A valet. None of them treated him like a stranger. None of them treated him like an ordinary guest. They treated him like someone who had quietly become part of their lives. Victoria finally approached his table. "Good morning." Ethan stood politely. "Good morning, Victoria. Mind if I sit?" "Of course." She settled into the chair across from him. "You seem popular around here." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "Popular? Half the hotel knows your name." He chuckled. "I have stayed here a few times over the years." Victoria raised an eyebrow. Enough for people to thank you for changing their lives. Ethan's smile faded into modest discomfort. People are kind. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Before Victoria could press further, the restaurant manager appeared carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. This arrived for you yesterday, Mr. Walker. Ethan looked surprised. For me? A family dropped it off before the storm. He handed over the package and walked away. Victoria noticed Ethan staring at it for several seconds. Something about the box seemed important. Slowly, he untied the string and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of handwritten cards, colorful drawings, crayon hearts, folded notes. The top card read simply, "Thank you for believing in me when nobody else did." Victoria looked up at Ethan. For the first time since meeting him, she saw something close to emotion break through his calm expression. And suddenly she realized that whatever story Ethan Walker had been quietly carrying for years was much bigger than she had ever imagined. Victoria could not stop thinking about the cards. Even after breakfast ended and most guests returned to refreshing weather forecasts on their phones, the image remained in her mind. Dozens of handwritten notes, dozens of children, dozens of lives somehow connected to Ethan Walker. The storm continued through the afternoon. Roads remained closed. Flights remained canceled. With nowhere to go, Victoria spent most of the day reviewing reports from her laptop inside the suite. Ethan sat across the room working quietly on operational projections for the company. Hours passed in comfortable silence. Neither interrupted the other. Around 3 o'clock, Ethan stepped out to take a phone call. His tablet remained on the coffee table. Victoria had no intention of snooping. She respected boundaries. At least she told herself she did. Then she noticed a small wooden box partially exposed inside Ethan's open messenger bag. It looked old. The corners were worn smooth with age. A faded brass latch reflected the soft afternoon light. Victoria stared at it for several seconds before looking away. Then she looked back again. Curiosity can be a powerful thing. The box itself was not locked. She hesitated. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Finally, she reached forward and gently lifted the lid. What she found was not what she expected. There was no money, no confidential documents, no secrets about business. Instead, the box contained letters, hundreds of them. Some were written on colorful construction paper. Others were folded notebook pages. Several included drawings made with crayons and markers. A few had photographs attached. Victoria carefully picked up the first letter. Dear Mr. Ethan, thank you for helping me believe I could go to college. Another read. Thank you for paying for my science camp when my family could not afford it. Another said, thank you for teaching me that being kind is never a waste. Victoria opened a photograph. A teenage girl stood proudly beside a high school graduation stage holding a diploma. On the back someone had written, you were the first person who said I could do this. There were dozens more. Children, families, teachers, single mothers, foster parents. Every letter carried the same message. Gratitude, respect, love. Not because Ethan had given speeches, not because he wanted recognition, because he had quietly shown up when people needed someone. Victoria heard the suite door open. Her heart jumped. She immediately closed the box. Ethan stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He stopped when he saw her sitting beside the open bag. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Victoria stood quickly. I am sorry. Ethan glanced at the wooden box and then back at her. Surprisingly, he did not appear angry. It is okay. No, it is not. Victoria lowered her eyes. I should not have looked. Ethan set the coffee cups down. Most people would not understand what they are. Then tell me. His expression softened. He sat quietly for several seconds. Outside the window, snow drifted across the Denver skyline. The heater hummed softly in the background. Finally, Ethan spoke. Every year, Sophie and I choose a few families who need help. Victoria blinked. A few. Ethan smiled. Maybe more than a few. She stared at him in disbelief. How long have you been doing this? Ethan looked toward the wooden box. His answer came almost as a whisper. Since someone once did the same thing for us. And in that moment, Victoria realized the story she had uncovered was only the beginning. Victoria did not speak for several moments after Ethan's answer. The storm outside continued to blanket the city in silence, but inside the suite, an entirely different kind of quiet settled between them. It was the quiet that comes when assumptions begin to crumble. Ethan picked up one of the letters from the wooden box and smiled faintly. This one is from a girl named Hannah. Victoria watched him carefully. You helped her? Ethan nodded. Years ago. He handed her the letter. She wanted to become a doctor. Victoria unfolded the page. The handwriting was neat and confident. At the bottom was a recent photograph of a young woman wearing a white medical coat. She is a pediatric resident now, Ethan said. She starts her first hospital rotation next month. Victoria looked up. How many people have you helped? Ethan laughed softly. I have never counted. Why not? Because that was never the point. He closed the wooden box gently. When Sophie was 6, she became very sick. Victoria remained silent. Ethan rarely spoke about himself, and she sensed how carefully he chose each word. There were months when I thought I was going to lose everything. His eyes drifted toward the snow beyond the window. Medical bills, missed work, fear, all of it. Victoria felt her chest tighten. She remembered the hospital bed he had mentioned, the late-night phone call, the note from his wife. Suddenly, every piece connected. What happened? She asked quietly. Ethan smiled. A lot of people showed up. Family. Some. He shook his head. Mostly strangers. Victoria frowned. Ethan continued. A teacher organized a fundraiser. A mechanic repaired my truck for free. A retired nurse spent weekends helping Sophie with schoolwork. Someone paid our heating bill one winter and never left a name. He paused. People I barely knew carried us through the hardest season of our lives. Victoria lowered her eyes. And when Sophie got better, I promised I would spend the rest of my life doing the same thing for someone else. The room fell silent again. Not awkward silence. Reverent silence. The kind that follows truth. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled. Excuse me. Victoria watched as he answered. Hello. A young man's excited voice filled the speaker. Mr. Walker, I got in. Ethan immediately stood. You did? Full scholarship. Ethan's face brightened. That is incredible. I wanted you to know before anyone else. Victoria listened as the young man spoke through tears of gratitude. When the call finally ended, Ethan simply sat down and returned the phone to his pocket as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Victoria stared at him. Who was that? A student. You paid for his education? Only part of it. Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why does nobody know any of this? Ethan looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Because it is not about me. Victoria looked at the wooden box one last time. Hundreds of letters. Hundreds of lives. And then a strange memory surfaced from years earlier. A hospital. A frightened teenage boy. An anonymous donor who had paid for a treatment her family could not afford. Victoria's heart skipped. The details were distant, but suddenly the feeling was not. For the first time, a question formed in her mind that she could not ignore. What if Ethan Walker had been helping people long before she ever met him? And what if one of those people had been someone she loved? That question stayed with Victoria for the rest of the evening. The storm had finally begun to weaken, but the uncertainty inside her mind only grew stronger. She sat near the window, overlooking the snow-covered streets, while Ethan reviewed spreadsheets from the conference that had been postponed. The city lights shimmered against the fresh snow like scattered stars. Neither spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Ethan looked up from his laptop. Of course. Have you always lived in Seattle? Most of my life. What about 10 years ago? Ethan smiled faintly. Still Seattle. Victoria nodded slowly. Did you ever volunteer at St. Matthew Children's Hospital? Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Sometimes. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. Why? Ethan closed the laptop. Because Sophie spent a lot of time there. After she recovered, we visited whenever we could. Victoria stared at him. The memory was becoming clearer now. Her younger brother, Noah, had been 15. A rare medical condition. Endless appointments. Endless bills. Their family had money now, but not back then. Her father had lost his business. Her mother worked double shifts. There had been one particularly difficult winter when they nearly gave up hope. Then help arrived from somewhere. Anonymous donations. A scholarship fund. Transportation vouchers. No name. No recognition. Just help. There was a teenager, Victoria said quietly. His name was Noah Hayes. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he searched his memory. Noah. He repeated the name softly. Then suddenly he smiled. The kid who loved astronomy. Victoria froze. You remember him? Of course I remember him. Ethan laughed gently. He used to carry that giant book about galaxies. Everywhere. Victoria could hardly breathe. You knew him? A little. Ethan leaned back. Good kid. Ethan. Her voice trembled. Were you involved with the Family Assistance Fund? He looked uncomfortable immediately. A lot of people were involved. That is not what I asked. Ethan remained silent. Victoria stared at him. The answer was written across his face long before he spoke. I helped where I could. For several seconds, she could not find words. Images from years ago flooded back. Her exhausted mother crying with relief after another anonymous payment appeared. Her brother receiving treatment that doctors once said might be impossible. Their family surviving because strangers refused to let them face hardship alone. You helped my brother. Ethan looked away. A lot of people helped your brother. But you were one of them. He offered a small shrug. Maybe. Victoria felt emotion rising unexpectedly inside her chest. All her life, she had believed success came from intelligence, discipline, and hard work. Yet sitting across from her was a man whose greatest achievement would never appear on a resume. A man who had quietly changed lives while asking for nothing in return. Ethan reached for his coffee. How is Noah doing? Victoria smiled through eyes suddenly filled with tears. He is a professor now. Ethan's face brightened instantly. That is wonderful. And at that exact moment, Victoria realized something that would change everything. The anonymous kindness that had once saved her family was sitting only a few feet away, drinking coffee as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The storm finally broke the following morning. Pale sunlight spilled across the city, turning rooftops and sidewalks into fields of glittering white. For the first time in 3 days, the roads began reopening. Travelers filled the hotel lobby with renewed energy. Flights were being rescheduled. Meetings were being restored. Life was moving again. Yet something had changed between Victoria and Ethan. The distance that once existed between chief executive and employee had quietly faded. Not because Ethan had tried to impress her. If anything, he seemed determined to act as though nothing unusual had happened. That morning, they shared breakfast before preparing to leave for the company's regional leadership summit, which had finally resumed. You never told me, Victoria said as they waited for coffee. Ethan looked up. Told you what? That you helped my family. Ethan sighed softly. Victoria, your family was one of many. That does not make it smaller. He smiled politely, but said nothing. The conference center was only a few blocks away. By noon, executives from across the country filled the ballroom. Hundreds of employees gathered beneath crystal chandeliers and enormous projection screens displaying quarterly results. Victoria took her place near the stage. Ethan sat several rows back among department managers. Everything appeared normal until the presentation began. During the first hour, an unexpected problem surfaced. Financial reports from one division showed serious discrepancies. Revenue projections did not match internal records. Expenses had been hidden inside multiple accounts. The room grew tense. Executives whispered among themselves. Members of the board exchanged worried looks. Victoria remained composed, but she could feel the pressure building. Millions of dollars were involved. The company needed answers immediately. Who reviewed these reports? One board member asked. Several heads turned toward the operations team. Another executive stood. The data passed through Ethan Walker's department. A murmur spread across the room. Ethan slowly raised his head. Only the final summaries, he replied calmly. The source reports came from finance. Nevertheless, another executive said, your approval appears here. A large screen displayed documents bearing Ethan's electronic authorization. Victoria frowned. Something felt wrong. Ethan examined the files without panic, without defensiveness, without anger. Those are not the reports I approved, he said. The room became even quieter. Are you suggesting they were altered? Someone asked. Ethan looked directly at the screen. Yes. Several executives exchanged skeptical glances. One of the senior financial officers, Richard Langford, folded his arms confidently. That is a serious accusation. It is not an accusation, Ethan replied. It is an observation. The tension thickened. Victoria watched both men carefully. Richard was polished, respected, and powerful within the organization. Ethan was a middle manager sitting alone near the back of the room. Logic suggested one conclusion. Her instincts suggested another. Richard stepped forward. If Mr. Walker is implying misconduct, I believe he should provide evidence. Ethan nodded once. Fair enough. Then he calmly opened his laptop. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. Just quiet confidence. Victoria felt a strange sense of certainty settle over her. It was the same feeling she had experienced while reading the letters. The same feeling she had felt hearing Sophie laugh during that late-night call. Ethan Walker was not a man who protected himself with excuses. He protected himself with truth. And as the entire ballroom waited for what would happen next, Victoria realized she was no longer wondering whether Ethan was right. She was wondering how many people were about to discover who he really was. The ballroom remained silent as Ethan connected his laptop to the presentation system. Hundreds of eyes followed every movement. Richard Langford stood near the front with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Victoria remained seated beside the board members, watching carefully. Ethan opened a folder and projected a series of timestamps onto the giant screen. "These are the original reports submitted by operations," he said calmly. "And these are the reports presented this morning." The differences appeared immediately. Numbers had been altered. Expense categories had been moved. Approval dates no longer matched. A low murmur swept across the room. Richard stepped forward. "That proves nothing." Ethan nodded. "Agreed." He clicked another file. "This proves something." The next screen displayed access logs from the company's servers. Every modification was recorded automatically. Usernames, dates, times, locations. The evidence was simple and impossible to misunderstand. Several board members leaned forward. One removed his glasses and stared at the screen. Another quietly asked for copies. Richard's confident expression began to fade. "These records show every revision made after my approval," Ethan continued. "They also show which account performed those revisions." The ballroom became so quiet that the hum of the projector could be heard. Then Ethan revealed the final page. A complete audit trail. Every change led back to one department. Finance. More specifically, one executive account. Richard Langford's account. No dramatic music. No raised voices. Just facts. Clean. Precise. Undeniable. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. The board chairman slowly stood. "Is this information verified?" Before Ethan could answer, another voice came from the rear of the ballroom. "It is." Heads turned. A woman in her early 30s walked down the aisle carrying a tablet. Victoria recognized her immediately. Hannah Parker, the pediatric resident whose letter Ethan had shown her. "I am also a certified forensic accountant," Hannah explained. "I reviewed these records this morning after Mr. Walker asked for a second opinion." She handed documents to the chairman. "The data is authentic." Another voice followed. An older man rose from a nearby table. "I can verify it as well." It was Judge Michael Bennett, a respected federal judge attending the conference as a guest speaker. Victoria suddenly remembered one of the letters in Ethan's wooden box. Then a third person stood. A retired military officer. Then a school principal. Then a nonprofit director. One after another, people Ethan had quietly helped throughout the years revealed themselves. None were there because Ethan asked them to come. Most had not even known each other. Yet each carried the same look of respect, the same gratitude, the same certainty about his character. Victoria looked around the room. Executives who had doubted Ethan minutes earlier now sat speechless. The board members were no longer evaluating spreadsheets. They were witnessing something far more powerful. Reputation. Not the kind built through titles or wealth. The kind earned through years of quiet integrity. Richard lowered his eyes. The chairman requested an immediate investigation. The decision was unanimous. Then silence settled over the ballroom once again. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of fear. The silence that appears when truth finally stands alone. Victoria looked toward Ethan. He was not celebrating. He was not smiling. He simply gathered his papers and prepared to return to his seat. And somehow that humble gesture moved her more than anything else she had seen that day. The conference ended late that evening. Most attendees left talking about audits, board decisions, and financial controls. Victoria left thinking about none of those things. Her thoughts remained fixed on Ethan Walker. As the ballroom slowly emptied, she noticed him standing alone near a window overlooking the city. Snow still covered the streets below, glowing beneath rows of golden streetlights. He looked peaceful. The same way he had looked while speaking to Sophie. The same way he had looked while reading letters from people whose lives he had quietly changed. Victoria walked toward him. "Everyone is looking for you," she said. Ethan smiled. "That sounds exhausting." She laughed softly. You realize half the room thinks you are a hero. That is a very strong word. It is an accurate one. Ethan shook his head. I just try to help when I can. Victoria stared at him for a moment. Do you know what I found in that hotel room? Ethan looked confused. A floor blanket. She smiled. That too. For the first time, he looked genuinely curious. Victoria folded her arms and gazed out at the city lights. I thought I was sharing a room with one of my employees. Ethan remained silent. Then I thought I was sharing a room with a good father. Still he said nothing. Then I discovered a man who spent years changing lives without asking for credit. Ethan looked down, uncomfortable with praise as always. Victoria took a slow breath. What I actually found was the kindest person I have ever met. For several seconds neither spoke. The city shimmered beyond the glass. Somewhere below, traffic moved slowly through the snow. Finally Ethan smiled. That is very generous. No, Victoria shook her head. It is. Honest. A few days later, life returned to normal. Flights resumed. Offices reopened. Meetings filled calendars once again. Yet some things were no longer the same. One Saturday afternoon, Victoria stood nervously on the front porch of a small house outside Seattle. She held a paper bag containing pastries she had purchased that morning. The door opened. Ethan looked surprised. Victoria? Before she could answer, a young girl appeared behind him. Bright blonde curls. Curious blue eyes. Daddy, Sophie whispered. Who was that? Victoria knelt slightly. Hi, Sophie. Sophie studied her carefully. You are the hotel lady. Ethan laughed. Hotel lady? Sophie nodded confidently. The one who made Daddy smile when he got home. Victoria felt her cheeks warm. Sophie stepped forward. Do you want to come inside? The invitation was simple, innocent, genuine. Yet somehow it felt like the most important invitation Victoria had received in years. She looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Sophie. Then all three smiled. Months later, when people asked Victoria what had changed during that snowstorm in Denver, she never talked about business. She never mentioned investigations or conferences or financial reports. Instead, she remembered a man sleeping on the floor so someone else could have the bed. She remembered a father reading a note written by his late wife. She remembered hundreds of letters inside an old wooden box. Most of all, she remembered discovering that the strongest people are often the quietest ones. And in finding Ethan Walker, Victoria Hayes found something far more valuable than success. She found grace. She found respect. She found a family she never expected. And for the first time in a very long time, she found home.